Ash was not a big drake. He was small, even for his age. His scales were a dull grayish-green, not the bright copper or deep red that other drakes were known for. His wings were thin and had never fully opened. His claws were short. His tail was narrow. He was, by every measure, an unremarkable young drake, and the world had made sure he knew it. He had no family. He could not remember his mother's face clearly anymore. He remembered warmth, a long time ago, and the smell of something like smoke and pine. But that was all. Everything after that was cold streets, empty stomachs, and the sound of footsteps walking past him without stopping. He had found the marketplace on his own when he was very young. It was loud and crowded and smelled of bread and fish and horse sweat. At first he had simply wandered through it, looking for scraps. But one day he found a broken piece of wood near a carpenter's stall, and without thinking, he began to carve it with his small claws. He had always done that, picked up sticks, stones, pieces of bark, and shaped them into small figures. A bird. A horse. A little dragon with tiny folded wings. He did not know why he did it. It was just something his hands did when the world felt too big and too quiet at the same time. One morning, a small human girl had stopped and stared at the little wooden bird in his claws. She had pointed and tugged at her mother's sleeve. The mother had looked at the carving, then looked at Ash, then looked at the carving again. She had placed 2 copper coins on the ground in front of him and taken the bird without a word. Ash had stared at those coins for a long time. After that, he had a corner. It was not much of a corner. It was the far end of the eastern row, between a crumbling wall and a stall that sold old rope. Not many people came that way. The ground was uneven and the wind hit harder there than anywhere else in the market. But it was his. He set up a small flat piece of wood across 2 stones and arranged his carvings on top of it. A horse. A rabbit. A small drake with its wings spread wide. That one he never sold. He kept it tucked in the cloth wrap he used as a blanket at night. Most days were quiet. People walked past without looking. Sometimes a child would slow down and reach out a hand, but a parent would pull them away before they got close. Ash had learned not to call out to people. The one time he had tried, a man had stepped back and knocked over his display, and when Ash had made a small sound of distress, the man had told him loudly that wild creatures had no business in a proper market. Ash was not wild. He just had no one. There was a man named Gord who managed the eastern row. He was broad and red-faced and wore a heavy coat even in mild weather. He came around every few days to collect stall fees from the sellers. Most sellers paid without complaint. Ash did not have a proper stall, only his 2 stones and his flat board, but Gord had decided that was enough to charge him for. The fee was 3 coppers a week. Some weeks Ash had it. Some weeks he did not. On the weeks he did not, Gord would stand over him and speak in a low voice that was somehow worse than shouting. He would say that if Ash could not pay, he would have the cart, the small broken cart Ash used to carry his things and sleep beneath, taken away. He would say it slowly, watching Ash's face while he said it. Then he would leave, and Ash would sit very still for a while, trying to breathe normally. It was on one of those days, after Gord had walked away, that a boy threw a stone. Ash did not see where it came from. It hit the edge of his display board and knocked 3 carvings into the dirt. He heard laughter somewhere behind him. He picked the carvings up carefully, checked them for cracks, and set them back in their places. His hands were steady. He had learned to keep his hands steady. That evening he sold 1 rabbit carving to an old woman who looked at it for a very long time before placing her coins down. She did not speak to him either, but she was gentle with the rabbit, wrapping it carefully in a fold of her shawl before she walked away. Ash watched her go and felt something small and quiet move through his chest. When the market closed and the other sellers packed their things and left, Ash stayed. He always stayed. There was nowhere else to go. He packed his remaining carvings into the cloth wrap and tucked them under the cart. He curled up beneath it, pulling his thin blanket. The same piece of rough cloth he had found behind a baker's stall 2 winters ago, over his side. The wind came down the alley between the crumbling wall and the rope stall and pushed against him steadily. He tucked his nose under his tail. Above him, the sky had gone a deep blue-black. There were a few stars. The market was quiet now, just the sound of distant footsteps and somewhere far off, a dog barking once and then stopping. Ash looked at the stars for a while. He was not unhappy exactly. He had learned that unhappy was a feeling that needed energy, and most of the time he did not have enough energy left at the end of the day for it. What he felt instead was something flatter and quieter. A kind of gray. The world was large and he was small in it, and no one had ever seemed to notice the difference either way. He thought about the old woman and the way she had wrapped the rabbit in her shawl. He thought about the girl who had bought the very first bird, a long time ago. He reached into his cloth wrap and took out the small drake carving, the one with its wings spread wide, and held it loosely in one claw. He had made it from a piece of pale wood he found near the river. The wings were not perfect. One was slightly longer than the other. But he had spent a long time on the face, and the face looked like it was looking at something far away, something worth seeing. He put it back. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would carve something new. Tomorrow he would set up his board again between the 2 stones. Tomorrow Gord might come, or might not. Tomorrow a child might stop, or might not. That was how it went. That was how it always went. He fell asleep to the sound of the wind, small and alone beneath his cart, in the corner of the market that no one else wanted. It was a Tuesday when Walt came to the eastern row. He was not a tall man. He was middle-aged, with wide shoulders and rough hands and a quiet way of moving that did not draw attention. His coat was brown and worn at the elbows. He carried a small list in one hand, things he needed from the market. Nails. A length of cord. Perhaps some oil for his tools. He was not the kind of man who wandered. He came to the market with a purpose and he left when that purpose was done. But something made him slow down near the end of the eastern row. He was not sure what it was at first. The stall was not bright or decorated. There was no sign, no banner, no one calling out to passers-by. It was just a flat board across 2 stones, and on top of it, a row of small wooden figures arranged in a careful line. Walt stopped. He looked at the figures for a moment. Then he stepped closer. There was a horse with its head turned slightly to one side, as if it had just heard something in the distance. There was a rabbit sitting up on its hind legs, ears long and perfectly even. There was a small bear with its paws resting flat in front of it, looking very calm and very patient. And at the end of the row, a bird with its wings just beginning to open, not fully spread, but in that first moment of lift, when a bird has decided to go but has not yet gone. Walt picked up the bird carefully. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the underside of the wings. He ran his thumb along the grain of the wood. Whoever had carved this had paid attention to the wood itself, had followed the natural lines of it instead of fighting against them. The wings did not sit on the bird like an addition. They grew from it. The whole thing felt like it had always been that shape, like the wood had simply been waiting for someone to find it. He looked up. Ash was watching him from behind the board. The young drake was sitting very still, the way small animals sit when they are not sure if something is a threat or not. His scales were a dull grayish-green. His eyes were pale amber and very steady. Walt held up the bird. "You made this?" Ash nodded once. "How long did it take?" Ash blinked. People did not usually ask that. 3 days, he said quietly. Walt nodded slowly, still looking at the bird. "The grain runs diagonal here," he said, tilting it slightly. "Most people would have carved against it. You went with it." Ash said nothing. But something shifted slightly in his expression. "How much?" Walt asked. "For copper," Ash said. Then, quickly, as if expecting to be argued with, "It took 3 days." "I heard you," Walt said. He put his hand into his coat pocket and took out 6 copper coins and set them on the board. 4 for the bird. 2 because the work is worth more than you are charging. Ash looked at the coins. He did not pick them up immediately. He looked at them the way someone looks at something they are not entirely sure is real. Walt set the bird down carefully beside the coins and looked at the rest of the figures. "Do you have family nearby?" he asked. His voice was easy and unhurried, the way someone asks about the weather. "No," Ash said. "You live in the market?" A pause. "Near it." Walt glanced at the small broken cart behind Ash. He glanced at the thin piece of rough cloth folded on top of it. He did not say anything about either of those things. His eyes moved to Ash's left foreleg, resting on the edge of the board. There was a bruise there, dark against the dull scales, the kind of bruise that comes from something blunt hitting with intention. He did not ask about that either. He picked up the bird again, looked at it once more, and tucked it carefully into his coat pocket. "Good work," he said simply. Then he finished reading his list and moved on down the row. Ash watched him go. He sat with the 6 copper coins in his palm for a long time after that. He could not have explained why they felt different from other coins. They were the same size and weight. But the man had looked at the bird the way Ash looked at the bird, like it was actually something. Like it had taken something real to make it. He did not sleep well that night. The wind was bad and the cart gave little shelter. At some point it began to drizzle, a thin cold rain that came in sideways and soaked through his blanket before he could tuck it tighter. He lay curled and wet and listened to the market settle into silence around him. By morning he was stiff and tired and his foreleg ached where the bruise was. He set up his board. He arranged his figures. He sat down behind them and waited. He did not expect Walt to come back. Most people, once they had bought a thing, did not come back. They had what they came for. They moved on. But at the second hour of the morning market, Walt appeared at the end of the eastern row. He was carrying something wrapped in cloth. He walked to Ash's stall and set it down on the board without ceremony. Inside the cloth was a meat roll, still warm, wrapped in paper. Beside it was a small clay pot with a cork in the top. Walt tapped the cork. "Broth," he said. "It travels better than it looks." Ash stared at the food. "Eat it while it is warm," Walt said. He sat down on the ground beside the stall, his back against the crumbling wall, and took a small piece of cord from his pocket and began working a knot out of it. He did not look at Ash. He did not explain why he had come. He did not ask for anything. He simply sat. Ash looked at the meat roll. He looked at Walt sitting against the wall, working quietly at his cord. He looked at the meat roll again. He picked it up and ate. He was very hungry. He had been very hungry for a long time, but hunger was one of those things he had gotten used to carrying around, like the cold and the bruise on his foreleg. He ate slowly at first, then less slowly. The bread was soft. The meat inside was warm and had been seasoned with something he could not name but that tasted like something he had not had in a very long time. When he opened the clay pot the broth was still steaming faintly. He drank it. Walt said nothing. He worked out the knot in his cord, examined it, folded it neatly, and put it back in his pocket. Then he sat quietly with his hands resting on his knees and watched the market begin to fill with the morning crowd. After a while Ash said, "You did not have to come back." "No," Walt agreed. Ash looked at him. Walt looked at the market. Neither of them said anything else for a while. But Ash noticed that Walt did not leave for a long time. He just sat there beside the stall in his worn brown coat, quiet and unhurried, as if sitting next to a small cold drake in the worst corner of the eastern row was exactly where he had meant to be that morning. Walt came back the next morning. And the morning after that. He did not always bring food, though sometimes he did. A bread roll. A small bundle of dried fruit. Once, a piece of smoked fish wrapped in brown paper that Ash ate so quickly he was almost embarrassed by it. But even on the mornings when Walt brought nothing, he came. He would sit against the crumbling wall beside the stall, sometimes with a piece of wood in his hands that he was shaping into something, sometimes with nothing at all. He would sit and watch the market and say very little, and after a while he would stand up and go about his day. Ash did not understand it. He had learned, over the years, to understand most things people did around him. He understood ignoring. He understood mockery. He understood the particular way someone's face changed when they saw him and decided he was not worth their time. He understood gourd and the flat, threatening voice and the way power worked when one person had it and another did not. But he did not understand Walt. He thought about it at night under his cart. He turned it over in his mind the way he turned wood over in his claws before carving, looking for the grain, looking for what was underneath. People did not do things without a reason. That was something the streets had taught him very early. Kindness always had a shape to it, and if you looked long enough you could find where the edges were. He kept looking for Walt's edges. He could not find them. On the fifth morning Walt arrived and sat down, and for a while neither of them spoke. The market was slow that day. A cold front had moved in overnight and the sky was the color of old pewter. Most of the regular shoppers had stayed home. Ash had sold nothing since the previous afternoon. Walt looked at the carvings on the board for a while. Then he said, without looking at Ash, "I have a room at the back of my workshop. It is small. There is a cot in it and a stove that heats the whole back half of the building. I use it to store lumber mostly, but the lumber can be moved." Ash said nothing. "You would not owe me anything," Walt continued, in the same easy unhurried voice he used for everything. "No payment. No work required. You could come and go as you liked." He paused. "It would be warmer than here." Ash looked at his hands. His claws were resting flat on the board in front of him. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "No." Walt nodded slowly, as if this was a reasonable answer, which he had expected. "Why?" Ash said. It was not really a question. It came out flat and quiet. Walt looked at him then. "Why am I offering, or why are you saying no? Why are you offering?" Walt was quiet for a moment. "Because the room is empty and you are cold," he said. "That is all." Ash looked at him for a long time. Walt looked back. His face was open and still and gave nothing away except that it was not hiding anything either. "People have been kind before," Ash said finally. "It always costs something. Later, if not now." Walt did not argue with that. He did not say that he was different or that Ash could trust him or any of the things people usually said when they wanted you to believe something about them. He just nodded once, slowly. "All right," he said. He stood up, brushed off his coat, and looked at the carvings on the board one more time. "The rabbit is good," he said. "The ears are even." Then he walked away. Ash sat behind his board and watched him go and felt something uncomfortable moving around in his chest. He did not have a name for it. It was not anger. It was not sadness exactly. It was something more like the feeling of standing at the edge of something and not knowing how deep it was. He pushed the feeling down and went back to carving. 3 days passed. Walt still came in the mornings. He did not mention the room again. Ash did not mention it either. They fell back into their usual quiet, which was its own strange comfort, though Ash would not have called it that. On the 4th day the temperature dropped sharply. By afternoon the wind had picked up and the sky had gone from gray to a deep bruised color that the older market sellers knew well. They began packing up early, moving quickly, tying things down and calling to each other across the rows. Ash watched them and felt the first unease settle in his stomach. By evening the market was empty. By nightfall the storm had arrived. It came in hard and fast, the way bad storms do when they have been building for days out beyond the hills. The wind hit the eastern row like something with weight behind it. Ash had pushed himself under the cart and pulled his blanket tight and pressed himself against the crumbling wall and told himself it would pass. The cart went first. One moment it was above him and the next a gust caught it from the side and it rolled twice and smashed against the wall of the rope stall and came apart in pieces. The board across the two stones went with it. Ash heard his carvings hit the ground in the dark, scattering across the wet stones. He scrambled forward and grabbed what he could find by touch, the rabbit, the bear, the small drake with its wings spread, and pressed them against his chest and curled around them. The rain was hitting him directly now. It was not ordinary rain. It was the kind that came almost sideways and felt like small stones against bare skin. His blanket was soaked through in minutes. The cold moved from being something outside him to something inside him, working its way into his joints, into his chest, into the base of his skull. He sat in the wreckage of his stall in the dark and the rain and looked at what was left. The board was broken. The cart was in pieces. His remaining carvings, the ones he could not find in the dark, were somewhere on the wet stones of the eastern row, being rained on. He sat there for a long time. He did not want to go. Going felt like admitting something, though he could not have said exactly what. It felt like giving the world the satisfaction of being right about him, that he could not manage, that he needed something, that the cold and the loneliness had finally added up to more than he could carry alone. But the rain did not care about any of that. He got up. He tucked the 3 carvings inside his soaked cloth wrap and pressed it against his chest and walked through the empty market in the dark. He knew the way. He had walked past Walt's workshop many times, on mornings when the market was slow and he had taken the long way around to keep himself moving. It was on the far side of the merchant quarter, a wide low building with a lamp above the door that Walt left burning at night. The lamp was burning now. Ash stood at the door for a long time in the rain. Then he raised one small claw and knocked twice, very quietly, as if he was not entirely sure he wanted to be heard. The door opened almost immediately. Walt stood in the warm light of the doorway in his work clothes, looking completely unsurprised, as if he had simply been waiting for a knock that might come at any hour on any night. He stepped back and opened the door wider. He did not say anything. Ash stepped inside. The room at the back of the workshop was small. There was a cot along one wall with a blanket folded on top of it. There was a small iron stove in the corner with a pipe that went up through the ceiling. There were shelves along the other wall, still holding some lengths of lumber that Walt had stacked there neatly. The floor was wood and the ceiling was low and the whole room smelled of sawdust and cedar and something faintly warm that Ash could not name but that made him feel, for reasons he did not fully understand, like he could breathe more slowly. Walt moved the lumber to the main part of the workshop without making a thing of it. He did it the way he did most things, quietly, without ceremony, without looking for a reaction. He brought a second blanket from somewhere and laid it on top of the first. He checked the stove, added wood, and got it going until the small room was warm enough that the cold Ash had been carrying in his bones since the storm began to loosen its grip. Then Walt went to the main room and left Ash alone. Ash stood in the middle of the small room for a while. He looked at the cot. He looked at the stove. He looked at the shelves, now half empty, where his 3 rescued carvings sat. The rabbit, the bear, the small drake with its wings spread. He had set them there without thinking, and seeing them on the shelf made something tighten briefly in his chest. He sat down on the cot. The blanket underneath him was thick and dry. The stove made a low steady sound. Outside he could still hear the storm working itself through the town, the wind and the rain hitting the roof of the workshop in waves. In here it was just warmth and the smell of wood and the sound of Walt moving around in the next room, unhurried, doing whatever it was he did in the evenings. Ash lay down. He did not mean to fall asleep so quickly. But the warmth came up around him like something solid, and the cot held him, and the storm stayed outside, and he was asleep before he had time to think about any of it. He slept for a very long time. When he woke it was morning, and the smell of something hot was coming through the gap under the door. He lay still for a moment, confused in the way of someone waking somewhere new. Then he remembered. He sat up and looked at the 3 carvings on the shelf, and the room settled around him into something real. He opened the door. Walt was at the workbench in the main room, already working. There was a pot on the small stove near the bench, something thick and warm inside it. Walt looked up and nodded once toward the pot without stopping what he was doing. Ash found a clay bowl on the shelf nearby and filled it and sat on a low stool near the warmth and ate. It was porridge with something sweet stirred through it. Ash ate all of it. That was how the first day went. And the second. And the days after that. There was no formal arrangement made. No rules were spoken out loud. Walt worked in his workshop and Ash stayed in the back room, and slowly, without any single moment he could point to, the back room became less like a place he was allowed to be and more like a place that was his. He began to eat regularly for the first time in as long as he could remember. Not scraps found at the end of market days. Real meals, twice a day, simple but warm. Porridge in the mornings. Bread and soup in the evenings. Sometimes meat on days when Walt had been to the butcher. Ash ate without rushing, which was new. He had always eaten quickly before, the way animals eat when they are not sure the food will still be there if they slow down. He began to sleep through the night. He had not done that in years. And slowly, so slowly that he did not notice it at first, his scales began to change. The dull grayish-green that had covered him for as long as he could remember started to shift. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But Walt noticed it one morning and said nothing, only looked for a moment longer than usual before going back to his work. A week later even Ash could see it, a faint warmth coming into the color, something almost bronze underneath the green, like a fire seen through old glass. He was healing. He had not known how much he had needed to until it started happening. About 2 weeks after the storm, Ash came into the main workshop and stood near the workbench and watched Walt work. Walt was shaping a chair leg on the lathe, his hands steady and sure. He worked the way he did everything, patiently, without wasted movement. After a while Walt stepped back and looked at what he had done. Then he looked at Ash. "You want to try something?" he asked. Ash looked at the tools laid out along the bench. Chisels. Gouges. A fine curved blade he had not seen before. He nodded. Walt handed him the curved blade and set a block of soft wood in front of him. He showed Ash how to hold it, how to angle the blade with the grain instead of against it. Ash already knew some of this, the way he had always known it without being taught. But Walt's way was more precise, more considered. He explained why each thing worked, not just what to do. Ash listened carefully. He began to carve. It was a simple shape at first, just a rounded body, 4 legs, a head. But as his hands moved the old instinct came back and the shape became something more, a dog, sitting alert, ears forward, tail just beginning to lift. Walt watched without interrupting. When Ash set it down Walt picked it up and turned it over the same way he had turned over the bird that first day at the market. He looked at it for a long moment. "You see how the grain runs through the ear there," he said, pointing. "That is not accident. You read the wood before you started." Ash looked at the ear. He had not consciously done it. His hands had simply done it. "Show me that," Walt said. "How you read it." So Ash showed him. He took a new block and ran his claws lightly over the surface and explained, haltingly at first and then more clearly, how he could feel the direction of the grain before the blade touched it. Walt listened with the same attention he gave everything. Then Ash showed him something else. He took a small piece of pale wood and began carving a symbol into the base of the dog figure, a careful looping mark, like a knot that had no beginning and no end. Walt watched without speaking. "It is a protection mark," Ash said quietly. "Old Drake tradition. You carve it into something you make for someone else. It means," he paused, looking for the right simple words. "It means the thing carries good intent. That whoever made it wished well for whoever receives it." Walt was very still for a moment. "Every toy I have ever made," Ash said, "has one on the bottom." Walt looked at the dog figure in his hand. He turned it over. There was the mark, small and careful, on the base. He set it down gently. "Teach me that," he said. So Ash taught him. And Walt taught Ash. And in that way the days passed, the two of them working side by side at the long bench, the workshop warm and full of the smell of cedar and fresh wood and the quiet sound of tools moving with purpose. They brought the toys to market together. The dog sold the first morning. So did a new horse, and a small fox that Ash had carved in an evening while Walt worked on a cabinet order nearby. People stopped at the stall differently now. They picked the figures up and turned them over, and when they found the small symbol on the base some of them asked about it and Ash told them simply that it was a good wish built into the making, and most of them nodded as if that made sense to them, as if they had always suspected that made things better. It did make things better. Ash had always believed that. One evening after the market Ash sat on his stool in the workshop and looked around at the bench and the tools and the shelves and the warm light coming from the lamp in the corner. Walt was at the far end of the bench, finishing a joint on a small cabinet, his hands moving with their usual quiet sureness. Ash did not have a word for what he felt. It was not happiness exactly, or not only that. It was something steadier than happiness. Something that did not depend on the day going well or badly, that was simply there underneath everything, solid and even, like the floor of a good building. He had not felt it before. He thought it might be peace. He picked up a new block of wood and began to carve. The morning the elder came was a quiet one. The market was calm and the sky was pale blue and the air had the kind of stillness that sometimes comes after a long stretch of cold weather, as if the world has finally decided to rest. Ash and Walt had set up their stall in the eastern row, not in the old corner between the crumbling wall and the rope stall, but in a proper spot near the center of the row, one of the good spots, where the foot traffic was steady and the wind did not hit as hard. They had earned that spot. The toys were arranged on the board the way Ash always arranged them, in a careful line, each one facing slightly outward, each one with the small protection mark carved into its base. There were new figures now that they had not had before. A tall elk with its head raised. A sleeping cat curled into itself. A small drake with its wings fully open, not just beginning to lift but fully spread, reaching. Ash had made that one last week and Walt had said nothing about it except that the wingspan was perfect, which was the best thing Walt ever said about anything. Ash was carving a new piece behind the board, a rabbit this time, when he felt it. He was not sure what it was at first. A shift in the air. A particular kind of stillness that moved through the crowd before the cause of it arrived. People were stepping to the side slightly, not dramatically, just enough. Children were being pulled a little closer by their parents. Ash looked up. The elder was moving slowly through the market. He was large, much larger than Ash, the way fully grown drakes were large, broad across the shoulders, his scales a deep and settled brown with flecks of dark gold along his neck and jaw. His wings were folded against his back, but even folded they were impressive, their edges visible above his shoulders like the peaks of something very old and very solid. He moved with the careful slowness of someone who had learned long ago that his size required consideration in crowded places. He was looking around the market with the calm observant expression of a traveler taking stock of a new place. Then his eyes found Ash. He stopped. Ash set down his carving tool. The elder stood very still for a moment, looking at Ash the way someone looks when they see something they were not prepared to see. His eyes moved slowly. Taking in Ash's scales, which were no longer dull gray-green but warm and bronze-tinged, taking in the proper stall with its neat display, taking in the way Ash was sitting behind it with the ease of someone who belonged there. He walked over. He stopped in front of the stall and looked down at Ash, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The elder's expression was not unkind. It was simply searching, the way you look at something when you are trying to understand what you are seeing. "Young one," the elder said finally. His voice was deep and measured. "What is your name?" "Ash," Ash said. The elder looked at the toys on the board. He looked at the workshop mark that Walt had begun burning into the base of each piece alongside the protection symbol, a small simple W inside a circle. He looked back at Ash. "You live here," the elder said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Ash said. "With humans." "With Walt," Ash said. "He is a woodworker. We make these together." The elder was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to Walt, who had looked up from the far end of the stall and was watching the conversation with his usual calm expression, not stepping in, not pulling back, just present. "Is he your keeper?" the elder said carefully. "Are you bound to him in some arrangement? Work for shelter? Debt?" Something straightened in Ash's posture when he heard that. Not anger, not quite. Something more like clarity. "No," Ash said. "Then what is he?" the elder said. Ash looked at Walt for a moment. Walt looked back. His face was open and still and gave nothing away except that it was not hiding anything. "He is my family," Ash said. "I chose him and he chose me. There is no arrangement. There is no debt. He opened his door on a bad night and he did not ask for anything and he has not asked since." He paused. "That is what family is. I did not know that for a long time, but I know it now." The elder looked at him for a long moment. "You were alone before," the elder said. It was not a question either. "For a long time," Ash said quietly. "And you are not afraid here. Among them." Ash considered that honestly, the way he considered everything now that he had enough stillness inside him to think clearly. "I was afraid for a long time," he said. "Of everyone. It made sense to be afraid. But Walt is not someone to be afraid of." He looked at the elder steadily. "And this is my home. I am not a guest here and I am not a captive. I am someone who lives here." The elder looked at the stall again. He reached out one large claw and picked up the small sleeping cat carefully, the way large hands sometimes move with surprising gentleness when they are trying to be. He turned it over. He saw the protection mark on the base. His expression shifted into something that Ash could not entirely read but that seemed to have recognition in it. "You still carve the old marks," the elder said. "Always," Ash said. "Walt carves them now too. I taught him." The elder set the cat down carefully. He looked at Walt again. Walt met his eyes without difficulty, the way Walt met most things, steadily and without performance. The elder looked back at Ash and something in his face settled, like a question that had been answered adequately. "You look well," the elder said simply. "I am well," Ash said. The elder nodded once, slowly. He reached into the fold of his traveling wrap and placed several coins on the board, more than the price of anything on the stall. He picked up the sleeping cat. "The mark on the base," he said. "It is well made." Then he inclined his head slightly, which among drakes was a gesture of respect given between equals, and he walked on through the market and did not look back. Ash watched him go. Walt came and stood beside the stall and looked in the direction the elder had gone. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," Ash said. Walt nodded and went back to his end of the stall. Ash picked up his carving tool and sat for a moment without using it, just holding it, looking at the figures on the board and the people moving through the market and the pale blue sky above the rooftops. That evening when they walked back to the workshop together, Ash noticed for the first time the small wooden plate above the door. He had seen it before, of course. Walt had put it up quietly one afternoon about a week after Ash had moved in, without announcing it, without making a moment of it. Ash had noticed it then and had not said anything, and Walt had not said anything, and that had been that. But he looked at it properly now. It was a simple piece of pale wood, sanded smooth, with 2 names carved into it in Walt's clean careful lettering. Walt. Ash. Just that. No title. No label. No explanation of what they were to each other. Just the 2 names, side by side, above the door of the place they both lived. Ash stood in front of it for a moment in the evening light. He thought about the cold corner of the eastern row. He thought about the flat board across 2 stones and the thin blanket and the nights under the broken cart listening to the wind. He thought about the first coin, placed on the ground in front of him by a woman who did not speak. He thought about the bird carving with its wings just beginning to open. He had made that bird from a piece of wood he found near the river. He had not known then that he was making something that would stop the right person in their tracks one ordinary Tuesday morning. He had just been doing the only thing he knew how to do. Taking a piece of the world and making it into something worth looking at. He understood now that it had always been leading somewhere. Not to the market. Not to the coins or the stall or even the warm room with the cedar smell and the iron stove. To this. To the name on the plate beside another name. To the door that was always unlocked. To the person on the other side of it who had never once asked Ash to be anything other than exactly what he was. Walt had already gone inside. Ash looked at the plate one more moment. Then he followed him in and closed the door behind him, and the lamp above it burned warm and steady in the evening air, the way it did every night, visible from the street, just in case anyone passing needed to know that someone was home.